A United States Congressman, Riley Moore, has publicly called for increased American military support in Nigeria after the Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, explicitly described Christians as legitimate targets. In other words, this is not the usual coded language or indirect threats. It is a direct, ideological declaration that frames violence not as accidental or incidental, but as intentional targeting based on faith. Moore's argument from what is being quoted is straightforward, that this development should end the debate about what is driving the violence. He is saying this is not merely about land disputes or climate pressure or farmer-herder tensions. He is framing it as religious persecution and extremist ideology. Whether you agree with every part of that framing or not, the point you cannot ignore is this. When a terror faction openly declares a religious group as legitimate targets, they are not speaking the language of negotiation, compromise, or misunderstanding. They are announcing a mission. And the report goes further, describing what ISWAP has allegedly been doing in the Northeast. Escalating attacks, burning villages, destroying churches and homes, and pushing out statements implying that people can spare their blood only by converting to Islam or paying a protection tax, often described as jizya. Again, this matters because it signals a deliberate attempt to impose a system, not just to attack randomly. It's a message of domination. It's submit, pay, convert, or die. That is not an ordinary criminal problem. That is insurgency with ideology. Now, while this is being discussed internationally, another layer is being added by reports that Israel's Prime Minister has told US evangelical leaders that Israel is developing an agenda involving intelligence-backed support for persecuted Christian communities in Nigeria. Whether people like hearing Israel's name in Nigeria's domestic issues or not is beside the point. The point is what it exposes. That foreign actors are now openly discussing support plans for communities in Nigeria, the way you discuss a country that has lost control of protecting its own citizens. That alone should shame any serious government. Because ask yourself, how do we get to a point where your country is bleeding, your citizens are being targeted, and the loudest, clearest statements are coming from outside? How do we get to a point where foreign lawmakers are the ones sounding the alarm with urgency, while the Nigerian state responds with the same recycled language, the same tired condolences, and the same empty promises that never translates into security on the ground? This is the real scandal inside this report. It's not only what ISWAP is saying, it's the fact that Nigeria is now being discussed internationally like a failed security space, a place where outsiders have to step in because the government either cannot or will not do the basic responsibility of a state: protect lives. And let's be honest, this isn't new. What is new is the boldness. What is new is the clarity. What is new is that terrorists are no longer even pretending. They are declaring their targets openly. That is what happens when violent groups feel unchallenged. That is what happens when impunity grows. That is what happens when communities cry for help, issue warnings, raise alarms, and the response they get is silence or slow motion. And that brings us to Nigeria's bigger picture, the deteriorating situation that is now embarrassing the country on an international scale. Insecurity in Nigeria is no longer regional. It is not just the Northeast. It is not just the Northwest. It is not just the Middle Belt. It has become a national stain, spreading, mutating, and feeding on weak response. We have terrorist factions with ideological messaging. We have bandit networks with military-grade weapons. We have kidnapping economies. We have rural communities that live under curfew, fear, and abandonment. We have roads people avoid because the road itself is a risk. And we have a government that has mastered the art of pretending things are under control while burying citizens every week. The Nigerian government has failed, not in a mistakes were made way, but in a structural, repeated, stubborn way. The kind of failure that happens when leaders are more interested in preserving image than confronting reality. The kind of failure that happens when speeches replace strategy. The kind of failure that happens when committees replace action. When press statements replace consequences. When we are on top of it becomes a ritual lie that citizens are forced to swallow. Because what exactly is Nigeria's plan? When communities report threats ahead of time, what happens? Often nothing, until the attack happens and then the government shows up with condolences.
Share this video, guys.
When attackers strike and escape, what happens? Often nothing, until another attack happens and then the government promises investigation. When citizens scream about patterns, about the same routes, the same forest, the same hideouts, what happens? Often nothing, until the death toll rises and then officials hold meetings. This is not governance. This is crisis management as theater. And now, look at the consequence. Nigeria has become so weak in its own security credibility that foreign politicians are now calling for intervention and support as if Nigeria is a battlefield territory that cannot handle its own threats.
Share this video, guys.
Do you understand what that means? It means Nigeria is losing respect. It means Nigeria is losing moral authority. It means Nigeria is losing the basic dignity of a nation that can say, we are responsible for our people. And I want to say something that Nigerians need to stop avoiding. It is not enough for the government to occasionally respond. It is not enough to bomb one camp and then allow 5 more camps to grow. It is not enough to arrest a few suspects and then let the larger networks breathe. The problem is not just that terrorists exist. The problem is that the state response is inconsistent, slow, politically cautious, and sometimes suspiciously quiet when it matters most. And that is why Nigerians are angry. Because you look at the level of suffering and you look at the level of official seriousness, and the gap is insulting. In a functioning country, when a terror group declares a population legitimate targets, the state would respond with overwhelming clarity. Not just words, actions, arrests, intelligence breakthroughs, protection, and visible pressure that tells every violent actor, you will not survive this. But in Nigeria, citizens are too used to violence being normalized. We have gotten to a point where even horror is turned into routine. That is unacceptable. And here is what makes it worse. The Nigerian government is not even honest about the scale of the crisis. They downplay, they sanitize, they blame unknown gunmen, they reduce terror to communal clashes. They speak like they are afraid of naming what is happening because naming it would force accountability. But reality doesn't need permission from government press statements. Reality is what people live every day. So when foreign voices are now speaking louder than Nigerian leadership, it is not because foreigners love Nigeria more than Nigerians do. It is because Nigeria's leadership has created a vacuum of urgency, a vacuum of moral clarity, a vacuum of competence. And in that vacuum, outsiders will talk, outsiders will plan, outsiders will frame the narrative, and Nigeria will sit there looking like a nation that has surrendered control of its own story. This is why the government deserves condemnation. Because the first duty of government is security, and Nigeria is failing at it publicly, repeatedly, and embarrassingly. And let me make it even clearer. When the government stays silent in the face of massacres, when it refuses to speak with force, when it acts selective about who deserves sympathy and who doesn't, when it responds like every tragedy is just another headline to manage, it creates a culture where killers believe nothing will happen to them. That's what impunity is. That's how it grows. You cannot defeat terrorism with lukewarm leadership. You cannot defeat extremists with selective outrage. You cannot protect citizens with press releases. Nigeria is bleeding, and the leadership keeps acting like the goal is to control the narrative instead of controlling the violence. And this is the message Nigerians must carry. Nigeria does not need more speeches. Nigeria needs consequences. Nigeria needs commitment. Nigeria needs a government that treats every Nigerian life as valuable enough to protect, not valuable enough to mourn after it is already gone.
This video, do well to share this video so that others can see. Drop your comments in the comment section. Don't forget to share. More days, more hope. Peace and love, guys.